Today we're going to revisit the Nest integration setup in Home Assistant. This is a much easier process than before because you don't have to worry about authorize URIs, redirect URLs, curl commands, SSH terminals, and all of that jazz. In addition, the pub sub is automatically configured for you, and the documentation has been updated to make everything flow in a nice, organized manner. We're going to go through that documentation and follow it step by step here in a few minutes and build out our Nest integration. So let's get started. We're going to start by using the Nest documentation on the Home Assistant site. This is the entire process, start to finish. And as I mentioned before, one of the updates is a more streamlined view of the steps required to get this Nest integration up and running, and that's all documented here. So we'll go through that here in just a minute. A couple of important points here before we get started. You can integrate your Nest devices in Home Assistant. It uses the Smart Device Management API. So you need to have an account there. We'll go through all this in a minute. And there is currently support for the following device types: camera, climate, and sensor. There's still no support for the Nest Protect smoke/carbon monoxide detectors. Cameras and doorbells support automation and device triggers, and a media source for viewing the recent events. So you can view your camera devices within Home Assistant. Remember that the Smart Device Management API requires a $5 US fee. It's a one-time fee. I think it's well worth it. If you want to integrate your Nest devices, you pay once and you're done with it. There's no recurring fee on that. Just as a note, the overview of the supported devices are thermostat devices that will expose a climate, a temperature sensor, and a humidity sensor. The other additional sensors that you can attach to a Nest thermostat are not supported in the SDM API. So those individual room sensors that are battery operated, you can place different places, those aren't supported here. The example would be all Google Nest thermostat models. And then for display, camera, and doorbell devices, there is a live stream camera entity. You can do device triggers for use in automations, such as person, motion, and doorbell pressed. And some examples of that, of course, are the wired and battery Nest Cam models, wired and battery Nest doorbells, and Google Nest Hub Max. Now, keep in mind, you're in control of the information and capabilities exposed to Home Assistant. You can authorize a single device, multiple devices, or different levels of functionality, such as motion events, live streams, etc., for any particular device. The integration is flexible enough to adapt to based on what you allow. As I noted before, other devices like the smoke and CO alarms for security systems are not currently supported by the SDM API. That is a Google decision, not a Home Assistant decision. So let's go ahead and go through our step-by-step process of getting this all set up. The first thing we're going to want to do is create and configure a cloud project under the Cloud Console. So when we're done with this, and again, I'm just going to go through step by step with this documentation. The end of this section, you will have a cloud project with the necessary APIs enabled. So we're going to go to the Google Cloud Console. I'm going to click on go into the console. I'm going to create a project over here. And I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call this Nest Integration. You can call it whatever you want it to be. And then you can add an organization, but we're not going to do that right now. I can put up to 24 projects or 25 projects in my account. So that's what that says there. Now, when it's done creating the project, you'll see that you have this screen pop up here. All it's telling you is that this is a starting point for your project, and you have the project name listed up here. So make sure that you're on the right project that you just created. All right, going back to the documentation, it says give your cloud project a name and click create, which is what we just did. Now we want to go to APIs and service library where we're going to enable APIs. So we want to go to API and services, and it already put us there. So we're going to go to library first, and we're going to enable a couple of APIs. Now the APIs we need to enable are Smart Device Management and Cloud Pub Sub API. So we're going to do Smart Device Management first. And we want to enable it, so I'll click on that and enable it. And it's going to take you to the actual page here for the API. I want to go back over to the APIs and services, back to the library now. And I want to search for the second one, which is the Cloud Pub Sub API. And the Cloud Pub Sub is where all your traffic is going to go. All your communication between your Nest devices, API and Google is going to happen is in this Pub Sub API. So I'm going to enable this one as well. So now we have a project, and we have both of the APIs necessary to make this work enabled. We're not utilizing them yet. We just turned them on so that the system can use them. All right, so now we have a cloud project ready for the next section to configure our authentication with OAuth. And we're going to be using OAuth as our authentication method to get into, to be able to talk to our systems. So step 2, configure OAuth consent screen. And by the end of this section, you'll have configured OAuth consent needed for giving Home Assistant access to your cloud project. So we're going to go back to the API console. We're going to click the OAuth consent screen. So back to the API console, and then click on the OAuth consent screen. And it's going to ask you for which type. You want to use external. Otherwise, it's not going to work correctly. And we're going to create an OAuth consent screen. Now, one of the differences between the original Nest settings and the way we're doing it now is we can skip a whole lot of the curl commands and a lot of the app domains and everything else. We don't need all that now. So let's just read the directions here. It says external, which we just did. This is the only choice if you're not a G Suite user. All right, so the app information screen needs you to enter an app name and user support email. So we're going to go over here and give it an app name. We're going to call this Nest Demo for our app name, and then a user support email. And you have to choose one of the emails from your account. So we'll just choose that one. And then we'll go down here to the bottom, and we're going to do developer contact email. And you can do the same email or a different email. This one looks like it's free text. So you can just put whatever you want in there. Let's just check the docs to make sure. Developer email. These are the only shown when you later go through the OAuth to OK. Omit unnecessary information, e-logo to avoid additional review by Google. So we don't need anything extra. Don't fill it out. Save and continue. So when you get to the scopes page, you just go down to the bottom and save and continue. And then test users. You need to add your Google account, your @Gmail address to the list under the test user setup. So let's add a user. And we will set this to our Gmail account. Click on add. And there's our test users. Once we do that, we'll click on save and continue. And navigate back to the OAuth consent screen and publish app to set the publishing status as in production. So we want to go back to the OAuth consent screen. And this Nest Demo app is the one we just created. We want to go ahead and click on Publish App, and that puts it into production. Now you're going to get this message, and it talks about that here. The warning says your app will be available to any user with a Google account, which refers to the fields you entered in the app information screen. If someone finds the URL, this does not expose your Google account or your Nest data. And it says make sure the status is not testing, or you will get logged out every 7 days. So we definitely want to make sure that's true. So let's go ahead and confirm that. And now the status is in production. Okay, so we have completed 2 of our steps now. Now this next step is going to give you your client ID and client secret, which you need in order to put that into Home Assistant to be able to talk to Nest. So we're going to use the desktop app auth service since Home Assistant is not a public website. Web app auth is no longer recommended to avoid needing to configure SSL and follow strict URL validation rules. That was a huge issue for a lot of people who were looking at my previous videos on Nest. They had this whole SSL issue. You had to set up a DuckDNS domain and a whole bunch of other stuff, or use the Nest or the Nabokasa integration and all kinds of stuff there. This takes away that step, makes it so much easier. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into Create Credentials under the Credentials section. So click on Credentials over here. create credentials, and we're going to use an OAuth client since that's what we have set up. Application type is web app, which we just talked about, or desktop app, which we just talked about, not web app. And you can give it a name. Let's see what we talked about here. OAuth, enter desktop app, pick a name for your credential. And I'm just going to call it Nest Demo User Creds. And then we'll create that. And you're going to get your client ID and your client secret. You're going to want to copy these and put them somewhere so you can use those here in a few minutes when we configure Home Assistant. So make sure you copy those down, and we can say OK. All right, that is our client ID and secret. Now we need to create a device project ID under the device access console. So now that you have all of the authentication configured, you need a Nest device access project, which is the thing we talked about that requires a $5 fee. Once you complete this, you'll have a project ID needed for later steps and the topic name needed to configure PubSub. So let's go to the device access console now. And we're going to create a project. I'm going to give it a project name, Nest Demo SDM, which is the Smart Device Management API account. And then we need our OAuth client ID. So let's just look at our steps here. Since I already have a Nest device project, I've already paid the $5 fee, and I've already set up all the stuff I need at this step. So I've gone through all of this right here, and I've gone and agreed to all of it. So you're not going to see that in the demo, but you will see that if you are freshly creating an SDM project. Keep in mind also, you cannot do this with a G Suite account. You have to use a regular account, a non-G Suite account. Now you have the device access console, which we just did. We created the project, gave it a name, and this is our OAuth client ID. This is the one we created in the previous step, the one that I asked you to store. So I'm going to copy that client ID, and I'm going to put it in here under my device access console. Click on next. And then as we go down here, we want to enable events by clicking on enable and create project. The difference between this and previous stuff is that you had to go through and manually mess with this PubSub settings and create a PubSub and do a whole bunch of stuff. This eliminates all of those steps. All right, so take note of the project ID as you will need it later. At this point, you have the project ID, client ID, and client secret. So our project ID is now the project ID at the top of this page here. So we're going to copy that. So take note of the pub subtopic, which is later entered manually as a topic name. So actually we need 4 things. So our pub subtopic is here. Scroll down if you don't see it on your screen. I'm going to copy that pub subtopic. Again, all of this stuff is done in these few steps, unlike the other time we did this when we had to do a whole bunch of curl commands and all kinds of extra stuff. And you were asking me, how come I can't do this on my Windows terminal? What do you recommend? Which SSH do I use? Etc. All that is eliminated. You don't have to do any of that anymore. So my pub subtopic is going to be that right there. And what else do we have here? So we have all of these steps now in order to make this work. We have our client ID, our client secret, and our project ID. So now we're going to go into our Home Assistant, and I'm going to use File Editor on my Home Assistant instance here. Okay, so I'm going to open File Editor because that's where I need to be. You can use whatever terminal or whatever editing software, whatever you're using to do this. You just need to be able to get to the configuration file to configure these settings. Okay, so I brought up File Editor, and I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to take this information here, and I'm going to paste that into my configuration.yaml file. Don't be scared of the YAML. Just make sure you have your spacing and everything correct. That's the biggest part of YAML. And always run a check config before you restart your server, just to make sure that everything is correct. Now I need to change these items right here. I've got client ID, client secret, and project ID. So I'm going to paste all of those in based on what we copied and created in these previous steps. So there's my client ID. Here is my client secret. And then my project ID is the one I got from the SDM, the Smart Device Management API. So I'll paste that in here as well. And once you do this, you're going to have to restart Home Assistant. So let's save it first. And then always, like I mentioned before, configuration, and you're going to want to go into server controls and make sure that you check the configuration before you actually restart it. So down here under settings, okay, once you're in configuration server controls, you want to check your configuration. And if it comes back good, then you're going to do a restart. And after you do the restart, we're going to add the integration into Home Assistant itself. And that's going to start pulling in our Nest devices. Actually, what it's going to do is it's going to go through the authorization process to allow us to connect to this Home Assistant instance to connect to our SDM API. So it's showing a valid configuration. So we're going to restart, and then we'll come back after it's restarted and continue with the process. Okay, so Home Assistant has restarted. So according to the documentation, our next step is to go in here and set up our devices under Home Assistant. Now there's two ways to do this. The first way is to click on My Add Integration button. And what that will do is take you, if you have it set up correctly, to your Home Assistant instance and then add the integration for you. Since I'm running multiple instances of Home Assistant, I can't do that here because I don't have it set to the device I'm working on right now. So I'm going to go to manual configuration steps, and that's what I'm used to doing anyway. I click on configuration, integrations, add integration, and I'll look for Nest. So under Home Assistant, let's go to configuration, integrations, add integration. We'll click on Nest here, or type Nest and click on Nest. And you're going to want to do OAuth for apps. And the reason why is because we created a desktop app. And these are the steps you'll follow regardless of the method you use up here. You'll have to go through the OAuth and device authorization steps. So OAuth for apps, and then we'll have to link our Google account. So submit that, click on link your or authorize your account. Choose the proper account if you have more than one account on your system or in your browser. And then it's going to ask for Google Nest permissions. Do we want to allow it to see information about our home? Yes. Do we want to, which devices do we want it to use? And we want both of these devices. We'll click on Next. And we'll have to choose the account again. It tells you that Google has not verified the app. That's fine because we know this is our app that we created here. Click on App, Advanced. And then we're going to go ahead and go to Nest Demo. And we want to have Nest Demo access our Google account. So we'll click on Continue. We need to click both of those. So there's two things here. We need to click Control and see the devices and View and Manage your pub, subtopic, and subscriptions. And this is our code. We need to copy this code. So you can click there. And when we come back over to Home Assistant, we will add the access token here. Now let's just go through and make sure before I submit that that is what the documentation says. Google Nest permissions, you see this where we talked about that. Redirected, you'll see a warning. Go to Advanced. Then you'll get the token, or you allow these things. You want it to allow both of these. And then you will get the token. Yes, you'll check the boxes. So we just keep going through all the check marks that I just went through. Copy the access token and then paste it in this right here and submit. The next step is to enter the cloud project ID to enable a subscription to received updates from devices. There's two ways to get this project ID, and I'm going to use the second way. You can go to the Cloud Console, or if you go back to your APIs and you do the drop down up here, you will see both of your project IDs. So I'm going to copy the project ID of my project, and I'm going to paste that in here instead and submit that. And once you've done all this, if you have your stuff all set up all the way through those steps, you will see both your thermostat or all your devices that you're authorized. In my case, I have two thermostats. So I just have these two, and you can select areas for them or not, and then click on Finish. And in your Nest Nest integration here, wherever that happens to be, here it is, OAuth for Nest, you should have two devices, 4 entities, or however many devices you have. So I have my climate downstairs, humidity, temperature, climate upstairs, humidity and temperature. I have all the stuff I need in order to control my Nest thermostats or my Nest devices. Now, I don't have any cameras to demonstrate for you here today, but if you follow these steps, your cameras will show up here just like everything else does. How you use them in Home Assistant is up to you. Now, in this case, what I can do now, since I have those Nest thermostats, is I can go into my dashboard here and I can edit the dashboard and I can add a card, and I'm just going to add one here. We'll just search for thermostat. Here it is right here. And you can give it an entity, and you can give it, you have both downstairs, upstairs showing up, and you can give it a name. This one is downstairs. Save it. And we'll get out of editing here. And now I have my thermostat card showing my Nest thermostat setup and my entities here, or my Nest thermostat entity here that I've just set up using all of those steps that we just went through. It's much, much easier than the way I used to do it, where you had to authorize URLs, URIs, you had to get the right one, you had to open a port, you had to use Nabucasa, you had to do a whole bunch of stuff with curl, SSH on a terminal window, and all kinds of things. All of that's been removed now. So all you have to do is just set it up the way we just went through those steps. It's all UI based. I will tell you, you need to make sure that you have the right account selected in your browser. You need to make sure that you have the right account selected in your settings over here. I ran into an issue where I had the wrong account selected up here and it wouldn't authenticate correctly. It gave me your partner email needs to be added to your home app or something like that. So make sure that you have the correct accounts setting if you have multiple accounts in Google. You also need to make sure you're not using a G Suite or some other locked account. Only private accounts will work. So if you run into errors, when you get to the authorization step in Home Assistant, make sure your account stuff is correct. Otherwise, you're going to have issues. And I did have a little bit of an issue with that initially, but I figured it out because I was in the wrong accounts. I created my device access on the wrong account and had to go back and fix it. So there's the steps for Nest. You can ignore all my other videos on this if you want to, because this is the new way to do it, the easier way, the updated documentation, the UI, complete UI steps, no curl, no SSH, all that stuff. So if you have questions, let me know in the comments down below. Hit me up on Discord. If you're not a subscriber, make sure you subscribe and hit that thumbs up button if you like the video. Join the channel if you feel like it. You get early access to videos and some other stuff. And we'll see you on the next one.